Hello, welcome to Limbo. What is a dragon? Beasts of medieval lore, terrors of the sky, a classic D's nuts joke that makes everyone laugh for sure, and the topic of many a media. My childhood was probably, unsurprisingly, a lot of animal books. But my favorite two series, by far, were Warrior Cats and Wings of Fire. I was so deeply entrenched in the Wings of Fire fandom, in fact, that I made fan art, which is what really got me into art to begin with, and joined the Wings of Fire Amino to post my art. I lost that account after a few years, and God, I hope I never see that account again. But I happen to remember this certain hyperfixation of mine and decide, hey, why not ruin my childhood again? And that of a very specific person watching this video. Hi, Gray. That being said, today we're going to be looking at an AO3 fic, Dragon Lair, by Wings of Fire Writers Guild. Now, what layers of hell does this belong in? Now, this may come as a shocker to some people, but it is so fucking difficult to find a Wings of Fire fanfiction that is sus, as the kids these days say, without being one-shots, lemons, or over 200,000 word general audience fics. Seriously, I read multiple stories in order to find something that was worth making a video on, and I am frankly shocked by the length these authors go to describe dragon sex in as much detail as possible. It was so hard, in fact, to find a real story that this is the closest I got. A smut pizza with left plot. If you don't know anything about Wings of Fire, this is an awful place to learn about it because this is genuinely such a good book series, and the fan fiction side of this fandom is just shit. But if you are deciding that this is the place where you want to learn about Wings of Fire, then it's about dragons. Specifically, magic dragons with tense racial relationships, and there's a prophecy and blah, blah, blah. I promise it's good. Humans do exist in this universe, but they are called scavengers and are considered to be unintelligent pests on the verge of extinction. Up until way later in the series, after Jade Academy is established and scavengers are studied further and found to be more interesting, but I don't think they're ever considered intelligent at any point by the dragons. Anyway, the story starts with a human/scavenger man named Tim stalking an elk in the forest. He was at his quarry, only yards away from the unknowing elk, but little did he know, something was stalking him too. As he fired a shot off towards the prey, killing the elk, he has been following for days, he suddenly got yanked up into the air. He realized that he had been grabbed by a dragon and, after struggling for a few moments, gave up, consigning to his fate of getting eaten or killed for sport. After a while, they arrive at a cave where he is dropped by the dragon, which is blue with glowing spots. My Wings of Fire fans out there already know this is a sea wing. After landing, Tim decided that he wasn't going down without a fight, and he pulled out his short sword on a very unamused dragon. He ran at the dragon, who tripped him with her tail with very little effort, and instead of getting up and fighting like a man, he instead curled up in a ball and closed his eyes like the frail little weakling he is. But in an amazing plot twist that doesn't constrain this story to being one chapter, even though I really, really wish it had, Tim didn't get eaten and heard somebody telling him to get up. As he opened his eyes, he found that it was the dragon talking, and he was suddenly much, much bigger. The dragon that captured him is Anemone, a sea wing princess who is an animus, which means that she has magic powers that slowly drive her insane every time she uses them. And she just used those powers to make Tim the size of a dragon. I'm going to choose to believe that that's why the stuff that happens later happens. She's just insane. But why did she fuck with magic like that, you may be wondering? Slavery. Also, Tim's name is Eggplant now. A bit on the nose if you ask me, but we'll get into that later. Eggplant's first job is to move scrolls around in the Jade Academy. Here, he quickly gets over his fear of dragons after watching them have nice interactions, and we meet Starflight. Starflight was not very keen on Anemome's use of animus magic to make a slave because, duh, and he told Eggplant that he understands that he's in a weird situation and probably doesn't fuck with it, but to just do exactly what Anemone says and see how it played out. Or if he'd even live. When they got to the Summer Palace where the scrolls were to be delivered, Eggplant got to meet Anemome's mother, Coral. She was, as everyone should be, shocked that Anemone had fucked with nature in such a way, but can't exactly stop her because she is literally the most powerful being in the entire fucking universe due to her animus magic. Small time skip later, and Eggplant had gotten much, much better at being a servant, even taking up a butler persona. At this point in the story, he is completely not afraid of dragons anymore, even considering Anemone to be something of a friend. There's a term for that, you know. It's called Stockholm Syndrome. As he brought some scrolls to Anemone, he noticed that she was acting a little bit funny, and she very quickly dismissed him for the day, which really tipped him off that something was up. But what? Well, you see, one of the scrolls that Eggplant was tasked with getting was called What to Do When Entering Heat. And I think you know where this is going. Anemone was entering heat for the first time, and she didn't have a mate. She knew she couldn't get a random sea wing to help her because she was royalty and couldn't get a mate because her mother would have an arranged marriage for political advantage. So she turned to a page called Temporary Solutions, and Eggplant was walking to his room, worried about whatever was going on with Anemone, when a dragon named Urchin, Queen Coral's royal messenger, approached him and handed him a small scroll, telling him that he needed to deliver it to Anemone immediately. He rushed back to Anemome's room, and when he opened the door, he got a full view of her jork in it. She, of course, was mad, and flustered and scared of dying, Eggplant explained himself before giving her the scroll and trying to leave as fast as possible. But before he could, Anemone stopped him and told him to turn around. Despite the fact that he was an entirely separate species, after seeing the display before him moments prior, he had a boner. Confident that death was imminently approaching, he turned around, pants tented, to find the hate in Anemome's eyes had been replaced with something much, much worse. Lust. Upon seeing Eggplant, Anemone gasped and realized that the way she had worded her original spell to make Eggplant large grow to fit a dragon's proportions meant that everything, and I mean everything, had grown. Anemone wanted him, and no amount of protest from Eggplant, even though there was not much protest, could have stopped her. Thanks to YouTube, I can't actually describe this scene, so I will take the infinitely worse option and critique it. First off, as the story stated, this was Anemome's first time, and she was way too good for it to actually feel like that. As I was gagging reading this for the first time, I couldn't help but think that the author must be foreshadowing something because it was too, I don't know how to say this, educated to be a rookie, so to speak. I have questions about Anemome's age based on this timeline, but for the sake of my sanity, I'm going to say that she's an adult in dragon terms. The other thing is that this author has to be a dude. I don't know, because Wings of Fire's Writers Guild account is not a single person, but rather a collection of anonymously posted stories. But I can assume. I am a biology major, so I know a lot of anatomy strictly scientifically, which often makes reading these works by porn addicts just that much worse. That's why I'm pretty sure that the clit is not a hole. But who knows, right? Oh, and I learned 2 new words that I've never heard to describe the things that they are describing here before. Snatch and prick, to describe pussy and dick, respectively. How interesting. Anyways, moral of this part of the story is that Anemone is a sub, and they're both disgusting fucking freaks, and Anemone, through monkey's paw-ass logic, accidentally made the perfect fucking machine and named him Eggplant. When he woke up the next morning, Eggplant felt wet. He assumed he was having a wet dream as he half-consciously felt something bobbing on his cock. He looked up to see who was doing it in his dream, and I have to quote this shit. Strangely, however, he didn't see the pale face of any woman that he remembered from his tribe. Not that nameless busty redhead hunter he had always fawned over. Not his childhood crush. Not even his sister. Yeah, that happened before. Let's not talk about it. No, actually, let's fucking talk about it. What in the ever-loving fuck could you possibly mean? There are no, and I mean not one circumstance that the author had to include this horrid little tidbit. Caged and studied. You need to be caged and fucking studied, bro. Fucking vile. Anyway, obviously, it was Anemone giving him early morning sloppy because whatever. Remember, she didn't know what sex was until less than 12 hours prior. As he looked up and immediately splooged, Anemone said, quote, "You weren't waking up for breakfast, so I had a snack." Neato. Poggers. Where are we right now? 3rd chapter. Fuck. They head down to actual breakfast, and Coral asks Anemone if she read the important scroll given to her last night, which she hadn't done in the midst of the fuckfest. Turns out, the scroll said, in an attempt to improve intertribal relations, Eggplant was being transferred to do work for the Rainwings. Anemone was pissed, but relented to her mother and agreed to let Eggplant go for a week. But not before they fucked again. At least this time there wasn't a drawn-out sex scene, it was just a single line of dialogue that isn't much better. When they arrived at the Rainwing Forest, Eggplant got dropped off to do some work, and Anemone ran off with her friends, Kinkajou and Tamarin. They had noticed some sort of vibe and a smell from Anemone and asked what was going on with Eggplant. And she immediately relents and spills the beans because apparently it isn't violently taboo to be fucking a whole different species. 2 days later, Eggplant was doing typical work, bringing Scrolls to Glory, the queen of the Rainwings, while reflecting on his experiences when he realizes for the first time that his feelings towards dragons might be a fetish. Well, what took you so long to figure that out? Did brain mass go to making your dick bigger? No shit, wanting to fuck dragons is a fetish. God damn, this dude is dense. Anyway, he brings the scrolls to Queen Glory, who offers him to sit and talk a while her husband, Deathbringer, comes back from a mission. As he talked with her, suddenly a voice whispered in his ear telling him not to resist or ask for help. Invisible Rainwings. And from the number of paws touching his body in different places, more than one. If you don't know anything about Wings of Fire lore, Rainwings are a lot like chameleons and can become almost completely invisible if they want to. Furthermore, they can create illusions of things that aren't actually there, like Eggplant's pants, which were suddenly missing. After a comment about Anemone, he knew that these weren't just any dragons, but Kinkajou and Tamarin. Suddenly, he was completely exposed, only hidden by the illusions created by Kinkajou's scales in front of the queen. And as a tongue seemed to appear from thin air and wrap around his cock, he was fighting for the ability to speak in the middle of a conversation. As he bust, they aimed his schlong right at Glory, causing him to jizz all over her. In public, mind you. Eggplant apologized profusely, but Glory didn't care. She had other things on her mind as she scooped some of the load that got on her into her mouth and dragged him to her bedroom. Turns out, Glory had been in heat for weeks, and since Deathbringer was away on a mission, she was very, very horny. Once again, we reach a sex scene that I cannot describe. I will say, though, Glory is a switch, and switch they did. The author's thing for thighs and ass comes through here pretty significantly, I will say. On the bottom side of the switch, in the middle of, to put it bluntly, back shots, Eggplant suddenly finds himself in Glory's mouth. It then suddenly switches back, and Eggplant stops, confused, to find Deathbringer on the other end. Okay, so fucking pause for a hot second. Deathbringer used his telepathic powers to momentarily switch POVs in the middle of this. Holy shit. I hate creativity. Please stop. Time skip because I can't take it anymore, and afterwards Eggplant is surprised that he isn't dead because Deathbringer, key word, death, caught him fucking his wife. Well, guess why? If you guess it's because he's a cuck, you'd be right. He had been there, watching from the shadows since Kinkajou and Tamarin showed up. What the fuck? The next day, Kinkajou and Tamarin approached Eggplant and peppered him with a million highly inappropriate questions about the queen, and blah blah blah. An enemy shows up a few days later, blah blah blah. Tamarin brings up a four-way, and oh thank God, there's a time skip. But it's straight into a different fucking sex scene. As that one reached its climax, however, there was a knock at the door. A guard telling an enemy that breakfast would be ready soon. Breakfast was a lot bigger than what was typical, so an enemy asked what the big occasion was. Turns out, Tsunami, Anemone's sister, was finally coming home. When she arrived, Eggplant was completely invisible to her until she bumped into him, at which she freaked out, face turning red and yelling, "You?" before promptly storming out of the building. Wonder what that's all about. At breakfast, there was an awkward atmosphere, so Anemone and Eggplant left early and went to her bedroom, where he said, quote, "That huge table of fish and only one piece of seafood stuck out to me that whole meal," before eating her out. I hate it here. The next morning, Tsunami requested to take Eggplant to do some work for her, looking for invasive species at a local beach. Eggplant was rightly scared, and as they flew to this beach, Tsunami said, "I know what you've been up to lately." Turns out she had talked with Glory and knew all about Eggplant and had heard his and Anemone's alone time the previous night. After dropping this bombshell, she asked him, how was she, by the way? Which is fucking bonkers to ask regarding your sister's sexual relations, but I digress. As he stammered for what to say to that, Tsunami suddenly dived towards shore, dropping him from significant height into the ocean. She then dragged him to shore, pinning him and threatening to kill him, when she suddenly felt something touch her belly. Her violence had given Eggplant a fucking boner. Eggplant, no, Tim, you fucking freak. God, I hope he dies. I feel like my notes properly portray what happens next. That night, Eggplant had a serious talk with Anemone about what they were, and Anemone admitted that she loved him and wanted to stay with him forever. So I guess they're a couple now? Sure, why not? That's not weird at all. Furthermore, Anemone was a-okay with him being used as a toy for literally whatever other dragon wanted to, including her sister. And at the end of this conversation, she said, quote, "I don't see the issue if we're both," referring to her and Anemone, "doing the same man. It's not like we're fucking each other. That'd be weird. I mean, unless you were in the middle. That might be hot." Incest. That is called incest. I am so fucking sick of this fucking story, man. Holy shit. Not long after this, Anemone gets told that Eggplant is being transferred again, this time to the Sandwing tribe to do work. God, I am so tired. Here he met Blaze and her adopted mother, Thorn. Blaze was excited to meet a scavenger that she could actually talk to and asked him to be a model so she can learn how to paint scavengers. This seems on the surface to be the first innocent interaction. It does not stay that way for long. As she was painting him, since Eggplant cannot seem to keep it down for shit, he had a boner and blah blah blah. Blaze notices boner and painting instead of real life somehow, and asks him to stay the night, and you know where this is going. As they're going at it, Thorn, who I will remind you is Blaze's adopted mother, walked in and joined. Do I even need to say it at this point? This author has issues. Anyway, while doing both at once, Thorn's stinger went through his hand and he got hospitalized. I was so fucking hyped when I read this. We are at the last chapter of the story, which was last updated in 2021. So I figured that he dies here and that's the end of the story. But no, he survives and gets apology sloppy from Thorn that night. However, I do not care and I want this to be over, so whoop-de-doo, he succumbed to the poison and died a horrible, painful death. Yippee. I hated this. Thoroughly ruined my childhood too, so that's cool. Also, as I said earlier, caged and studied. This author needs to be caged and fucking studied. Not only having a thing for interspecies relations, aka bestiality, but also incest. What in the ever-loving fuck? Please move to Alabama if you don't already live there. In terms of the story, it has been a minute since I've read the actual Wings of Fire books, so I struggle to assess the characters. However, I thoroughly believe that they are inaccurate to their canon counterparts. I remember Kinkajou being a very innocent and bubbly character, and here she seems more malevolent. Also, Deathbringer. That has to be the worst example of character brutalization that I have ever seen in a fanfiction. Eggplant would have been dead from the get-go. It just doesn't work from a canon's perspective. If you warp a character to fit your plot, then you are no longer writing about that character. You are writing about a different character with the same name. And I think I've mentioned that in other reviews before, but it still rings true here. Plot-wise, there was something, at least. I mean, events happened in a sequential and realistic way, but there wasn't a plot, per se. You could argue that Eggplant and an enemy falling in love, or Eggplant's character growth, if you even want to call it that, is the plot. But there's really nothing to keep you reading. No overarching storylines, no cliffhangers, just a honestly decent intro, and then whatever plot there absolutely had to be to connect characters between the sex scenes. In the terms of the ridiculous amount of dragon smut out there, this story is definitely up there in readability compared to the other slop that's out there. I really do have to give it credit on there being an idea of a plot and a semblance of character growth, but this was just porn. Dragon smut. Like, be so for real. Also, I will say this story was pretty decent in terms of literary quality. No misspellings, no awkward sentences, good paragraph structure, realistic-ish dialogue. Really an above average fic in terms of quality, in the sense of compared to the things I've covered on this channel. So, let's review this thing. Content, 2 out of 10. It's porn, I don't know what else to say. Characters, 5 out of 10. Mostly non-canon characters that were written to advance the porn, not the plot. Readability, 7 out of 10. If you're into this kind of thing, go nuts. It's not badly written, but if you care at all, this is mid at best. Overall, 14 out of 30. Well, that was fun. I need to recover from this and read some things that aren't utterly vile. If you want to traumatize me, recommend a fic in the comments and I might make a video on it. Hell is a kinder place than this. So long.